Dive in. So our first guest tonight is Jeremy, founder and CEO of Italic. Italic is an online retailer that sells luxury goods without the brand names. Or I guess the only brand name would be Italic or the corresponding markup. And instead, the company designs its own products and then taps the same manufacturers used by high-end labels like Alexander Wang, Burberry, Prada to spin out brandless versions. The manufacturer sets the price and splits the profit with Italic. And Italic has raised over $50 million from top VCs and 100 plus founders, including those from Coinbase, Figma, Scale, Segment, Loom, and many more. They're the leading direct from manufacturer marketplace in the US. And with that, welcome, Jeremy. Hopefully I got everything right. Did I miss anything in the intro?
I don't know who wrote that, but it was a lengthy one. Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Of course. It's great. It's great to have you. Thanks so much for spending some time with the Design Driven community. So what I'd love to do is actually rewind the clock a little bit. It's always fun to go back to the beginning and hear a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, and if and how that inspired the business that you have created today in Italic.
Yeah, sure. My family's been in manufacturing for 40, 50 years, so very directly inspired, Italic and a lot of kind of what we grew up with, and I guess our peers in the industry really kind of were, and the problems that manufacturers had really were the inspiration for to working on Italic. So yeah, hopefully that's very one-to-one.
No, that's great.
We're back to manufacturing, but here I am.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd love for you to just share with the audience a bit about your background as an entrepreneur, because Italic isn't your first rodeo. You had started a company in the direct-to-consumer CBD space called NotPot. You also started a company focused on high-volume hiring called Fountain. So I'm curious, what led from those to Italic, and were there, maybe one or two lessons that you took from each of those experiences that you've used now to build out your team and your company today?
Yeah, the best way to answer that is, I have your tech stereotype to a T. I grew up in Chicago, went to school out east, dropped out, moved to San Francisco, started enterprise SaaS company called Fountain, and the Teal Fellowship and YC and all that stuff, bunch of check marks, and I think that the biggest lesson I actually personally learned was, no one actually really drops out of college to work on enterprise software for the most part, unless you're really money driven, or HR software for that matter. And I think for me, I really wanted to work on something that, to your earlier point, was something I was a lot more personally driven by and excited. So 4 or 5 years into my journey with Fountain, I was able to gracefully and very, amicably, exit, still very close with my co-founder there, and work on something I was, personally a lot more excited about. I think in terms of learning lessons, this is, I've been a part of a number of startups by now, and I think there's a common mantra, which is first time founders care about products, second time founders care about distribution. But I like to add a third one, which is the third time you do it, what you really know matters the most of the team. So
right.
I think the things that I really kind of carry with me, at least, are you're going to spend the majority of your daytime and probably nighttime as well with the team that you bring and assemble around yourself. So you might as well find people you actually really do enjoy spending time with. And then I think another one that I struggle with even to this day is, I think as an earlier founder, if you will, it's really hard to kind of give away your own job to people who are admittedly better at it than you are. And I'm still really bad at that to this day. But I think, the sooner you do that, I think the better you off are as a company. And then I think the third one that I think, if I understood correctly, a lot of the people in this audience are founders or design managers or soon to be founders. But one thing that I think I wish I understood in the market that I kind of dropped out into building a startup in was very different than the one today, which is arguably much, much more founder friendly. But I think you as a founder are actually the one who investors are lucky to partner with, whether that's FirstMark or any other VC. It's not the flip side. It's they're lucky to be buying a portion of equity in your company, not lucky to. You're lucky to be able to work with them and should be grateful, obviously. But I think that mentality is really important. So I could go on and on, but
no, those are fantastic. And I actually wanted to come back to the team piece, because that is something that, I've heard before, where second or third time founders focus much more on the team than maybe first time founders do. I'm curious, when you started Italic, who were kind of your first, I'd love to hear about the kind of the co-founder group, and but also like who were kind of the first lieutenants that you brought in? Were they generalists? Were they specialists? Were they just how did you choose that initial team that you wanted to build with?
Yeah, I think it's a concept which is pretty common in the whole like startup lore, if you will, which is like you don't want to actually personally be the generalist as a founder. You want to like identify what you are. I think there's a difference between what you're good at and what you actually enjoy doing. And in the ideal sense, like they're one and the same. And in my case, I really enjoy working on like the design, and that's I guess my background by trade and kind of what I personally enjoy the most. But by default, there's like, especially in an offline type of business like Italic, there's so many moving parts. It's an extremely complex business, and you have to quickly realize like, hey, I'm not the best person to be doing this thing. And in my case, I think one example is product, like physical product in our world. It's something that I tried, and I think I quickly realized like, hey, I'm not great at. So the sooner you bring in someone who's deeply experienced in that, and there's pros and cons to people who, if you hire someone from like a McKinsey or Bain or whatever versus like an actual experienced kind of person. In retail, it's a little bit tricky because the learning curve to understanding how a startup works is like very high. And then also the learning curve to understanding how physical product development works is also very, very high. So the ideal case is like you find someone who has experience in both. But if not, there are cases where I think it's fine to hire generalists at a senior level, so long that they can think from first principles, but have the humility to admit they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. So they can go seek out external counsel. And then in other cases, like, let's say performance marketing or growth, it's like you want someone who like is super seasoned. You could find generalists, but you generally don't want that type of deep skill set to be learning on the job. You'd rather like, I've seen this before, I've done this before, like I'll just go in and start driving the car. So it's a bit of a cop-out answer, I think.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. And actually turning to Italic, help the audience get a sense for kind of your scale today, number of people on your team, and also maybe a little bit about, how many products you're serving, and any other high level metrics you think would be helpful to kind of elucidate Italic for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Italic is still pretty young and small. So we're about 3 years old. Team is about 80 people, spread between Asia and the States, and we have about 600. What is probably the most impressive is like we've designed and developed and brought to market about 600 or so products that we think are the best quality for the best price point, the lowest price point that you can kind of buy in the market these days. And we have about 70 manufacturers on our platform that use Italic's infrastructure and Rails to deliver products straight to kind of customers around the world. That's about the scale we are at.
Yeah, awesome. And the Italic business model is interesting because it's not one you see that frequently, and we'll get into a little bit of the brand side of things and your perspective on brand. But just walk me through like how the Italic business model has evolved over time, and most recently, alongside the latest raise, and kind of that evolution.
Yeah. So at the core, we think of ourselves as a managed marketplace, and it was a long time. It was actually kind of a tricky thing to get to that because at some points we really were pressured or motivated by the market to think of ourselves as a direct-to-consumer brand, which nowadays I'd like distinctly say we are not. And then in other cases, we have the membership model, which for a long time was the only way to shop from Italic. You had to be a member, and that drove us to think of ourselves more as a consumer subscription model. But at our core, I think what we finally landed on and are really confident in building is a managed marketplace, and what that specifically entails, as opposed to, like, let's say a pure marketplace model where there's a merchant and a customer and they directly interact without much intervention on our side, is that we serve two customers. So really, Italic is like a B2B2C model where we make money in three ways. One is our commissions on GMV. Two is our subscription fees from our consumer membership we offer. And then thirdly is the merchant fees we offer from the infrastructure and technology we've built to serve our merchants. The merchant, at our core, it's a managed marketplace that connects high-end manufacturers directly with end consumers. For our manufacturers, we call them merchants, and we build the entire end. Think about it like we built we call it portal, but like we built the payment orchestration, the order management system, inventory management system, product information management, like all that stuff kind of in-house,
right? So
that they can effectively kind of build a brand of their own without needing all of the tooling that, let's say, Shopify might provide. But instead, in our case, we have to build that for a manufacturer, which is a distinctly different customer than a brand. So we had to do that. And then on the consumer side, we have to educate them on, hey, you're shopping straight from the same manufacturer as, let's say, a high-end brand, but you're able to buy that for 50 to 80% less. And to many consumers, it's like too good to be true. So how do we educate them, or at least build the awareness in terms of like, this is trustworthy. It's not too good to be true. Like, this is how we do that. So, I think, we're still very early on both, to be honest. Like, there's so much more to do, but but kind of how we think about the business. And I think you mentioned the membership. We recently ungated. Think about it like a paywall. Instead of like having to pay to access the store to shop, we recently changed it to the membership being an upgrade. So now as a member, you get a whole suite of perks. And really, I think it was a function of just scale. There's a lot of startups out there that will say like, we enjoy economies of scale, when in reality, like, that's not entirely true. Whereas in Italic, like, economies of scale as a concept was developed to specifically describe manufacturing. So we enjoy like the purest form of economies of scale, where the more production volume you drive through a line in terms of one of our merchants, like the cheaper each unit gets. And in our case, we got to the scale where we can maintain. Previously, in order to have our prices, like, we'd lose money on every single product. Nowadays, we got to the production volume where we were starting to kind of see our manufacturers be able to turn profits, us take a margin, and still maintain those prices. And having the elasticity to actually price downwards when the entire market was actually trending upwards with inflation. So I think, that was kind of the main reason why we were able to ungate the experience. And then second of all, like, we really rely on the flywheel of having more customers, being able to kind of acquire more merchants. The more merchants we have, the more products, the more customers. So I think unblocking the ability for us to bring on more customers is good for all three of those.
Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Speaking of brand, I wanted to just touch on it because I would be remiss to not dive in, as brand feels like it's so pervasive in today's direct to consumer space. Since Italic takes a fairly strong stance on the concept of brand, or maybe lack thereof, I'm just super curious to hear your perspective on brand and its importance for consumers. Does today's society overvalue brand at the expense of consumer value, or like, how else do you speak to your customers about making that trade-off between the Prada bag versus the bag that's from the same Prada manufacturer without the Prada name on it?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is when people talk about brand, there's actually like two very different things that people refer to. And in one case, it's like, the brand model of like buying inventory at a low price, selling it at a high price, and that's how you make money. And then the other is just like brand, like what we as tech people talk about, like brand, right? So I think in the second boat, like, brand is incredibly important. It's more important today than ever before. You see this in like market leaders, where if you're first in the market and you're a category leader, you're probably worth like 3, 4, 5 times more than your second counterpart. And we really think of kind of in that case, like, brand is being incredibly important to the Italic being able to succeed. And I like to say, just as you book on Airbnb or you book an Uber car, like, that you aren't implicitly like staying at an Airbnb like product, but like you're booking through the
Right.
platform. The platform's actually the one that enjoys most of the upside. And then the second one, in kind of the more traditional sense of like the brand model, I think it's still obviously the whole notion of Italic is like, hey, people want like high quality products, and they can pay a lower price. But to your point, if you want to buy like the brand name or the label or the if you want to buy that product bag, like there is no world in which like you are not going to buy the product bag over the Italic bag, right? So I think in our what we think about this as is they can both mutually be very exciting. For example, the number one growing, the top two segments in retail that have been growing like in the past decade are, and this is like I'm not talking about like bi-coastal elites like big city,
right.
In general in the US, one is in private label growth within existing mass market retail. So, the Walmart private label, the Amazon private label, Target has like 15 brands, internal private labels, like over $1 billion. The value like play clearly makes sense. And then and then the second one, obviously, is like secondhand, which kind of you can talk about as well. But at the same time, LVMH is like, one of the world's most valuable companies now. It's luxury has obviously benefited tremendously over the past 5-10 years as well. So I think in general, we think of, the retail market, at least today, in the sense of like, if you want to buy the emotional kind of story driven purchase, you're always going to buy that. And there's companies that like really pull at your heartstrings there, Mischief being a great New York example of that. This isn't like, I think a lot of founders like kind of ego trip on this, where you think like, oh, I'm going to start like the next great generational brand and compete against like, Louis Vuitton, when in reality, like Louis Vuitton's been around for over 100 years, like there's a huge amount of heritage and legacy there that's very hard to replicate in the venture 2-3 years span. But anyways, I guess going back to the point, if you're going to buy from the brand, you're going to buy from the brand. And I think brands will always be run. If you want to buy kind of the value-based, rational purchase, like I think that's going to really proliferate as well, largely driven by companies like Italic, and not from, in my opinion, like not from the direct-to-consumer brands, because for the most part, like they're priced equivalently to the legacy incumbents now, because historically it used to be all about removing the middleman, and the middleman was like the retailer, and that was like the Warby days, Everlane, Bonobos. But now Facebook and Google have largely, replaced that, and they are now paying the same amount. Brands are now paying the same amount in terms of their cost of goods to kind of inflate the price to get there. So I think, it's more so from companies like us, Wayfair, Etsy, Chiou, so on and so forth, that have the scale to be able to kind of deflate prices for customers while maintaining quality. But and the most extreme example of this, and again, this is why I think it's like very important to not think of yourself as a customer always, is like a Shein, which now does over 10 billion in revenue, came out of nowhere. And I bet you, everyone in the audience probably wouldn't shop from Shein, but like they are probably going to be the biggest, digital brands like in the past, decade, being born in the second Wish. So I don't know. I could kind of rant on this.
No. That's great. We could talk about brand for forever, but I think those are some really salient points, and appreciate you sharing on this. And I like the distinction between the brand, the business model versus brand, kind of the customer loyalty side of things. Speaking of customers, and I just want to urge the crowd to feel free to use the Q&A portal, because we'll spend a few more minutes on prepared questions, then spend 5 or so on audience questions. But so feel free to drop those in. But I wanted to get your take on customer feedback and how how you gather it, how it plays into the products that you guys decide to make. I know you're a very data-driven organization, but curious as a founder, what your perspective is on customer feedback, when it's the appropriate thing to listen to, and when it's actually time to say like thanks, but no thanks. We've got our strategy, and it's maybe less impactful.
Yeah, it's really tough, because there's all these like startup axioms out there around like product market, like we have achieved product market fit when we satisfy this kind of very narrow KPI or whatever it is. And and on the flip side, like there's also days for those companies, which I know very confidently, where they're like, we know we don't have it at all, even though like the KPI we were kind of focused on is very much there. And ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it's a very gray answer. And I think it's a mix between the type of company you want to build, in which you might not actually listen to the data, and the customer might tell you one thing, and you might just totally throw it out the door and be like, I think differently, and
Right.
in other cases where like you're at the point where you're of no return, you kind of have to listen to the customer and be very religious around like building the discipline internally. And you can way overdo this too. Like there's a lot of companies that
Right.
you're digging your own grave, and and you're over like optimizing around a KPI that like wasn't important in the first place. So I think in our place, like what we really think a lot about is in retail, like what can make a business and what can more importantly kill a business is product and inventory. And again, in my world, like product refers to physical product, but if you over order product, like you can get in a really tricky situation where you have to dilute your brand by running promos. You can you're stuck with it. Like it's most of these brands, for what it's worth, like have to buy the inventory, and they're stuck with that on their balance sheet. So I think in general, what we care about like really narrowing in on is two things. Like one is, does launching this product or reordering into this product on behalf of our merchants, because they're the ones who ultimately foot the bill, does that move the needle in terms of our incremental ability to retain our existing customer base and see additional lift in the lifetime value of a cohort? Or on the flip side, does it incrementally improve our ability to acquire a new customer that may have been like idle on our customer list? And there's like very kind of tactical ways to do this, but I think for us, like the easiest way to do this is like just having an really three ways. Like one is having an ongoing customer panel, and just like building a relationship with your customers on an ongoing basis, where you have like some level of qualitative sounding boards to bounce ideas off of. Second, and doing that on like a weekly basis, ideally. Secondly, like from a pure data standpoint, like there's a lot of places where you can kind of collect this information, and building the discipline really to go back and check on a regular basis and evaluate, and having like postmortems in terms of like, did that result validate my initial hypothesis around launching this product? And there's a lot of times when like customers will, especially in retail, like say I want one thing, and then like proof is in the payment, like they buy it. And a lot of times correlate at all. So I think it's really important to I think balance both. And then I guess the third one is just like consumer insights, like to a broad-based group of people who are not necessarily aware of Italic, like how do they respond? What is like the general, kind of response? And it's hard to like over calibrate on one of those three. So I think that's how we've built the muscle internally per se, but I'll also be the first to say like, we have made it could look perfect on a data picture and like in reality completely go the opposite route. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, no, it's tough, and something that I think every company feels like they haven't cracked perfectly, but it's an evolving science. So one quick lightning question for me, and then we have one from the audience, and then we'll probably have to jump. The last one I just wanted to bring up, because I know it's really important to you, is, I wanted to speak briefly to the importance of culture at a startup and the impact of people that you bring onto the team at Italic. Maybe what's one quick lightning culture lesson that you've learned, as a 3-time founder that you'd love to share with the rest of the audience today?
Yeah, culture, I think the first time you think about it as like a founder, you're like, oh, this is like some MBA BS. Like, what is this? It's completely fluffy, And then the longer you do this thing, it's like, oh no, it's actually the single most important thing, like that it can't make your business, but it can kill your business. And I think that's actually the important distinction. The way I understand, like describe culture internally is it's why you do it and how you do it. And the first one's like very obvious, and it should be obvious to everyone on your team. It's like your mission and vision, and also it includes your values. And then the second one is how you do it. It's like, which I think is actually the important one, is it is the set of black and white rules that you play by in a gray world. And a good example of this, like, is everyone wants to be fair. Everyone will have integrity in their values. Everyone will have like whatever it is, but like,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean anything to anyone. Like you actually need to, I'll give you a very specific example of like, defining culture, which is if you should pick and choose day one, like, are you a company that works like 80+ hours a week and expects that and mandates that of your employees? And if so, like write that in stone and screen against that so that people don't get the wrong impression, like coming in the door or, out the door and so on and so forth. Or if you're not, like, that's totally fine. Just make that very clear and make that decision. The sooner you make those decisions, I think earlier in your company, like the easier it is to make really hard decisions. So I think, I could go on and on about this, but
yeah, no,
that's the most important takeaways. Like it needs to be like a yes or no. It can't be like, fair,
maybe right, fair. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things we hear is it's easy to write them on the wall. It's how you implement them in the daily actions of the company that really matters. All right. I'm going to give the final question to one of our esteemed attendees here. Say for Italic, are there any specific new product categories that you see as big growth areas in the future based off of your model, and why?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people just think of us as a direct-to-consumer brand, and that's like the first thing I want to like disprove. And obviously, proof isn't the thing. Like we have to act against that, and it's up to us to kind of prove that. But really, as a business, we want to kind of take over a lot of our customers' lifestyle shopping habits. And right now, like we offer cookware, we offer bedding, we offer apparel, but like that's not stuff you buy on a monthly or weekly basis. So we're really focusing on frequency now and driving down into things that might actually lower our average selling price, and also our average order value and maybe the LTV. But like I think will ultimately drive towards higher customer happiness. And the two categories I can very tangibly speak to is like beauty. We will definitely significantly expand. And then secondly is food and beverage, which may come as like a surprise, but it's something we've have a lot of excitement around building into.
Awesome, Jeremy. Well, I wish we had more time. I appreciate you coming on to speak to the Design Driven community. A lot of great insights packed into 30 quick minutes. So first of all, thank you very much for spending some time with us, and congratulations on the incredible business that you've built. For the audience, please go check out Italic at italic.com and on all social media, etc. They've got some beautiful products that you won't be missing any brands, to put it that way. That the quality is as high as it gets. So appreciate you stopping by, Jeremy, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.